Welcome, everyone. A lot of people here from all over, which is really exciting. If you know anyone who is trying to be here and missed it, we will be recording this and posting it on the Wheelhouse YouTube. So I'll send that out after. We'll go ahead and get started. So my name is John deRoulet. I'm the head of revenue management education at Wheelhouse. Been a revenue manager for 10 years and really enjoy doing this series with great revenue managers who come on and talk about what they're seeing, what they're doing, and keeping it pretty relevant to what's going on in the industry right now. So excited for this session. Katelyn, why don't you introduce yourself and we'll kind of go around.
Yeah. My name is Katelyn Ferrell. I'm a revenue manager with Natural Retreats slash 360 Blue, and I've been with the company for the past 3 years.
Awesome. Oh, and can you let us know just a little bit about the portfolio, size, locations, that kind of thing?
Yeah. Our portfolio size is about 1,500 homes. They're spread out across the country. 360 Blue is more of a 30A Florida environment, and then we've got ski locations as well. We've got beach locations, more remote, like Cape San Blas and Sea Islands. So everywhere. We've got Montana and Utah too.
Awesome. And John, want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. My name is John Graham. I am the revenue and marketing manager here at Summit Mountain Rentals in Breckenridge, Colorado. We have about 350 units here in the county, Summit County, about 250 or so in Breckenridge itself, ranging from 5 or 6 bedroom homes all the way down to little studios here.
Awesome. Rachel?
Rachel Robinson. I'm Director of Revenue for VTrips. We handle just under about 5,000 properties, and that ranges from Hawaii to Maryland down to South Florida, Texas. My kind of specialized area is going to be Panhandle, Florida, and Alabama beaches, but I do kind of have a hand in everywhere.
Awesome. And Emre?
My name is Emre. I'm Director of Revenue Management at Avantstay. I've been with the company since early days in the beginning, it's been 7 years now. And we're managing over 2,300 units across US and from Hawaii to East Coast, West Coast, vacation rental areas, urban markets and summer markets, winter markets. So pretty diverse portfolio, mostly initially folks started with more 4-bedroom plus larger group travel, but our portfolio evolved into really diverse from condos to large estates to the luxury side and across all segments pretty much.
Awesome. Well, pleasure to have you guys all on. Looks like we've got a really strong group of revenue managers for this first session. For anyone who hasn't joined us, the format we do here is pretty conversational. And really, we're going to focus on 3 things. How's the last quarter going? How's the current quarter? And what are we expecting for the upcoming quarter? Because it is kind of Q4, we have a good mix of snow and beach, so we can hear a few different perspectives. And we're just going to start out with, how did the end of the year wrap up for you guys? What kind of things did you implement or have to kind of shift, or, what strategies did you develop to kind of deal with the end of the year? And John, why don't we start with you, because it is your high season.
Yeah. So where to start? Let's look at last quarter. I guess I think you said we had talked about the holidays quite a bit. We ended the year on a high note going into January. I think we've kind of seen demand tail off in early December going into the holidays. But, going into the holidays, things were picking right back up. Going into January, the market's going strong here for us. Our biggest challenge is chasing the longer length of stay. In our market, we've seen the length of stay drop from, I think it was 4.6 last year for the December time. And this year came out, it's 3.8. So a significant drop in length of stay. And for that change that we made recently, and then also chasing kind of the next little half of our winter season here as we go into February and March, is we just be really implementing a lot of length of stay discounts for guests, encouraging them to book longer, to check pricing. We send out the promo emails and things like that. But I think for us, we've really been chasing that longer length of stay earlier, putting our best foot forward with pricing on that longer stay. And then it's kind of filling in around those stays here as we head into, spring break and President's Day and things like that.
Have the winter markets, especially where you are in particular, are you guys able to really push ADR growth year over year? Or how is the kind of competitive environment for ADR and occupancy?
I think for us, we've seen biggest push in ADR for us rather than occupancy in the larger or the higher end property. We've really been able to push homes that are, or they have unique amenities. Pet friendly is huge. I think it's something like less than 5% of all properties in Summit County are pet friendly. It's a ridiculously low number. So those homes are really nice homes, or those really high amenity ski in, ski out luxury level homes. We've been able to push up ADR, not so much on the lower half of, not necessarily our portfolio, but on the lower end homes that are just sort of there. Some of the deed ski places that we have here. We haven't really been able to push ADR too heavy on those. In fact, I think ADR has almost gone the other way, but we're chasing the longer length of stay in that regard. So a little bit of a different, approach depending on the type of property we're handling. And then as far as occupancy rates go, I think occupancy rate has held pretty steady for us year over year. If anything, we've seen a lot of fall off kind of in that midweek, where again, we have to really kind of sacrifice a bit of ADR to get those stays and get those bookings. But again, chasing those 4 or 5 night stays. Hey, you want to come up the weekend? Great. Book Monday. It's 50% off because I might not book it anyway, given the certain property they may be looking at.
Perfect. And last brief follow-up question. Through like December and into this early kind of January period, maybe November, did you make any significant changes to your strategy or your approach from, say, where you were in September or July?
Yeah, I think it was just mainly understanding where the market was headed and sort of, I think we all talked about it at DARM, understanding that, we're returning to sort of that pre-pandemic era, especially when you adjust for inflation. And I think it just came down to putting our best foot forward on those longer stays to really chase them earlier, knowing that we may not get as much compression as we're used to seeing. Obviously, New Year's will always see market compression here in the mountain communities, always a sellout time, but really putting our best foot forward to get those early bookings in spring break and MLK and Presidents. So again, just incentivizing guests to book that longer stay earlier. So if they're shopping and thinking about it, I want to put my best price forward. That may be 10% less than it was the year before when we were looking at pricing, but we wanted to increase the odds of getting those on the books early so we can kind of fill around.
Awesome. Thank you, John. Emre, how's your team? How are they doing towards the end of the year here? I know you have some winter markets, but you have a big variety. So how have you been leading your team? What kind of strategies did you implement and how did things go?
So I think first of all, like it's really like as John mentioned, like it's really like depends on the asset type, right? Like we're seeing like more pressure continue to increase on the lower tier homes, more standard budget friendly homes. Like those are the most getting impacted. But we see like strong demand for premium and luxury product, like across like all markets. Like the holidays were actually like pacing pretty well. Like I think it was a little bit shrunk into shorter period this year compared to last. Like it was like starting a little bit earlier. Christmas time like was a little softer, which we usually see softer Christmas like across most markets and like stronger New Year. But we saw that booking curve, like booking period, that's where we see compression shifted towards a little bit like towards New Year compared to previous years. So I think like really what we've been doing is really like focusing like really at the market level, but also like on the asset level, like rather than blanket strategy, what are the asset types have been like performing, struggling, like whether that's on the premium side, but on the like, lower side. So it's really like implementing based on the markets where we've seen like larger supply growth versus like the markets like where we've seen, there's still like not huge supply. So Breckenridge, for example, it's a good example. Like it's not like a supply heavy market. Like we see huge supply increase Tahoe, right? Like or Park City, like. So I think it's really like the strategy differ based on like how much each market seen like supply increase over the last 2-3 years, and really being on the more conservative side, which we are seeing. A lot of operators are also like following the same structure, just like taking those early bookings and like staying on the conservative side and filling up the occupancy. But I guess like for me, the biggest like the bright side is that we're finally heading to a more stable environment. Like we don't have big surprises as we used to last year. Like Q4, like it was pretty stable quarter. We're seeing like similar trends continue towards Q1 too. So which is great for the industry. I think that's all of us, like all revenue managers, has been like trying to understand what's going to come up, like what's going on in each market. And there has been too many noises like on the data side as well. So now getting to like more constant small growth or staying into like flat range, like across like most of the market has really been the, I think, best news of the last quarter.
Awesome. Thank you, Emre. And one quick question is, you mentioned, that supply growth tracking is really important. What data do you use? Where do you get the data to actually track that? And how do you relate that to demand growth? Like just a little bit of tidbits on where you're getting that, how you're doing it would be helpful.
Yeah. Airbnb is great on this, right? Like to track the, like how many active listings have been in the market and also like how many total nights has been booked. Obviously it's still like very critical to understand the asset type, right? Like you might have like, there are some markets, like for example, Joshua Tree, I'm going to give an example. Joshua Tree is a market, like there's tons of supply when it comes to like three bedroom and smaller homes. But when you start looking at like 5+ bedrooms, like that's where you see like the market is actually not saturated at all. And there's a completely different performance, like how the 5+ bedrooms perform year over year versus like how the 3 bedrooms perform. So it's really like understanding that portion and like in each market, what's the asset type like that is like have seen like most increase on supply, and really going that granular, it's been the most helpful strategy.
Awesome. Thank you. Katelyn, I know that you've got a lot of, not quite the same seasonality in Florida for the winter, but how did kind of the end of the year wrap up? Was there anything that your teams kind of adjusted in terms of strategy? And what does the snowbird season look like this year? What do you think about snowbirds?
First off, let me cover Park City because I do want to say something about that. I took
Yeah.
a Park City last year for our location, and the supply is very much something that needs to be monitored because Park City is one of those where historically they could charge whatever they want, especially for more of those luxury standalone homes. So something this year they've kind of struggled with is like getting more competitive with their ADR. It's something that they aren't totally understanding because historically they could charge whatever they want. But supply has gone up. There are more luxury homes that consumers have the ability to price shop, and that's something you need to keep in mind.
How are you, how's your team convincing the owners that they need to actually be competitive to the market instead of doing what they want there?
Supplying market data, doing your own manual kind of pricing shops and sending that data. And then just showing like their year over year progress. Hey, this is going down. We need to do something.
That makes a ton of sense. In the rest of the portfolio, how did things wrap up at the end of the year?
Pretty well. I would say festive was a little bit soft this year, especially because historically, at least my locations, the snow locations that I took over, could charge whatever they want. So some of them came into that booking window overpriced, which is something you never want to do. So we're kind of like towards the end there, kind of struggling to catch up.
And do you still, where is festive? Sorry.
What they call Christmas and New Year's.
Oh, in Park City?
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. Do you still also manage on the Florida coast?
I do have a hand in it, but I've stepped back a little bit just to take over more ski locations.
Gotcha. Well, we'll be jumping in a little bit more on ski too as we talk about January and February. Rachel, do you want to tell us how you can kind of pick and choose as well out of where your portfolio is? How did
I'll just stick with the Panhandle since we got plenty of snow on the call. For us, the end of Q4, beginning of Q1 is a really interesting time. Check-ins are really, really low, but occupancy is really high because we get the snowbirds that come in for 1, 2, 3 months. Some of our larger homes will see a spike for Thanksgiving and Christmas, but historically it's pretty quiet. But also historically, that's when we can really predictably start to see demand increase for our summer and spring bookings. Some of the metrics that we've been able to really predict over the years have been a little bit different this year. As far as snowbirds, we are having kind of a soft snowbird season. We've got lower demand. But the interesting thing is most of those snowbirds booked in 2023 to come in, early 25. So that's where, we can't really push the ADR on those. We can't hold off on putting rates in. So we started an initiative around November to get those snowbirds to rebook for 26 at really reasonable rate, trying to, pace a little bit with inflation, help our homeowners a little bit, but to incentivize them to go ahead and lock in their units. And so we're way ahead, I think, for 26, but that's something that we really have to prepare for a year in advance.
I've heard I've been talking to a number of folks who've been feeling like the snowbird season is pretty weak this year. Which is unfortunate, but I think it makes a lot of sense that they're going to be very squeezed across all of these different price increases for all the different things they need to do.
And our occupancy, it was down a little bit. It's not quite as much as what we saw in the market overall, but it was comforting. So okay, it wasn't just me. I didn't just scare all the snowbirds away. But yeah, it's hard not to have that full occupancy for snowbirds.
We've seen the same for our snowbird locations, that demand was just soft this year. And there is such a large booking window that you have to come prepared.
Yeah. And that's the other thing too, is the majority of people who have pretty robust snowbirds, I feel like I've talked to, most of those came in very early. And that kind of middle window is missing to some degree. Now, there is one interesting thing that I was talking to a customer about that caught me by surprise. They had surprisingly strong snowbird performance, and they were based somewhere in Alabama. But when we were looking at their data together, they were doing a lot of 14 nights. Has your companies considered doing it, considering snowbirds for less than 30 nights? And they were doing they had different rate positions for those, but their calendars were full of a lot of shorter than 30 night stays. Is that something either of your teams have considered or implemented? Or Emre, you can bring that up too. I know you have snowbirds as well.
Yeah, we have 14 nights snowbird reservations. I think that's people are getting more price cautious. I think that's part of it. They don't really want to commit to. I think that's might be related to with the macro conditions a bit more. And we're seeing this on the short-term rentals too, right? We're seeing the length of stays is shortening. Over the last year, it's been shorter than how it used to be. And we're seeing the same impact on the snowbirds and longer stays to are cutting their length of trips. So we've seen some markets 14 days, more than we used to month-long snowbird reservations, especially Portney is a good market on this.
Yeah. There's one other question I have for you guys, since you have stuff kind of all across the coast, is I've talked to a few folks, and this is just maybe a hunch, but I don't know if it's true, but I felt like looking at some markets that are known a little bit more for mid-level kind of clientele, that there's been they haven't struggled. So I'm wondering if there's some shift into the beaches that have more kind of production level properties or sell at a lower price point. Have you guys seen anything like that in your portfolios?
We definitely have. There's been a surge in, 3 to 4 bedrooms selling a lot better because multifamily vacations just are no longer as popular as they used to be. So those bigger, luxurious mansions that you see on the beach, they are hard to push, especially in the market that we're in right now with the conditions that we're seeing.
Yeah, capturing last year's ADR in a 5-bedroom or above is a win for me. If I can get $1 above, that's huge. The super premiums that kind of used to be commonplace to price out far in advance, that has to go. I mean, if you're a competitor of mine, I would like you to keep doing that. I think that would be fine. But for us, we have decided we're going to be priced right year round. We will hold, a tiny bit if we can, but it's really hard to make up bookings in a long booking window house like that. So honestly, the bigger they are, the harder we see the impact. And that gets localized in places that are, the bulk of the units are the super luxury, like 30A, for example, seems to have a harder time than Gulf Shores. Gulf Shores, though, we're out of land, so we don't really have an issue with too much of an inventory surge. But yeah, the sooner I think we can book out some of those big houses at a reasonable ADR, that's a win. But the homeowner who bought the house in 22 doesn't necessarily feel the same sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
30-day supply surged greatly. So we very much are like as competitive as we can get and very much focused more on pushing your occupancy rather than a higher rate because that's going to get you a win in a supply heavy market.
Makes sense. Well, let's shift a little to the present. January is a great time to talk because we get to talk about one, are people buying to stay in January and February? Is that a bellwether? Two, how is the pacing? We start to see the pacing for the upcoming season. So really interested to kind of hear your guys' thoughts, both ski and beach. Katelyn, why don't we start with you? What is your team seeing for January? How do you think the booking level pacing is going? And also, like, what are you noticing in terms of the stay trends? We talked a little about the snowbirds, so but just kind of curious how your team is reacting to bookings in January and what you guys are implementing.
Yeah. So for our ski locations, I would say January was a bit soft. The snow was not great, and it's very much dependent on that. So again, that's where we're looking at lower ADRs and pushing occupancy where we can. February and Presidents, it's soft as well because again, we're not seeing the kind of snow that we want, but I'm getting more reports that I think it's going to be up. So that's going to be like a super short booking window that we have to monitor. I think it's going to be a success if we stay on top of it. But I did notice that like we were trending behind. So I went ahead and let go of any length of stay restrictions we had and any high floors we might have had in place because, if the market's not commanding that, I'm not going to set it.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. The length of stay thing I think is really interesting. I'm very curious because the mountain stuff in particular is difficult because the snow can get good suddenly. And so you have to balance like trying to put stuff on early because the market's pacing behind versus suddenly it gets really good. How is your team thinking about that? How does that influence your pricing decisions?
So I mean, the great thing about Wheelhouse is that it monitors that for you. But again, we're not going to come into this booking window overpriced because that's a strategy that did not work in 2024. So thankfully we have Wheelhouse that monitors that for us, but we also, I'm talk consistently with the on-site teams, probably daily, about snow conditions. I myself am checking them. And if I see that there is going to be like some great snow coming in, I'll go through and likely by bedroom count and do some mass increases where I can.
That makes sense. And just for my own thought, when you see that and you're monitoring the snow on a daily basis, like how far out do you actually extend those kind of increases? Do you see there's a big storm front? Does that last like a week, a weekend, a month? Like how far out do you go?
I typically look like 1 to 2 weeks ahead. Just past that, it's not as reliable.
Yeah. I've been curious because I noticed in like the Northwest markets, you have kind of the opposite where if the weather is nice in the spring, people will buy for the summer, like they'll buy further out. So I was wondering if it was kind of similar. If there's a big storm front, if people buy throughout the winter season.
Sort of, but again, that snow is not as reliable. So if they might feel like the snow is great right now, and if they go ahead and book a month in advance, the snow might not be there. So ski is just so tricky because demand shoots up within a week or two.
Yeah, snow is hard. You guys are like casino RMs. John, why don't you give us a little bit of your perspective on this?
I think for us, we're fortunate enough this year that Summit County has some of the best snowpack in the Western Hemisphere. So I can't speak to the effects of snow too much this year because, like I said, we're really good. Breckenridge is 100% open right now. Keystone is opening their bowls here in the next couple of weeks. So our snow, it's great here. We're not really following it too much. I know Park City's been struggling a little bit. I know, obviously, John pointed out part of the upper PNW struggling for snow. But for us, our plan has really just been kind of what we've seen is our booking window hasn't necessarily shrunk as much. It's almost kind of like done this. We have the people who booked last minute booking even more last minute. People who booked further out booking even further out. I already have booking requests for March of next year, for February, for January, all of these. And I'm working my best to get our pricing up and, in line with where it can be. I think Rachel was mentioning some of the larger homes struggling down in the Panhandle. I have the opposite here. I am increasing my ADR on those larger homes year over year because I have more people asking to book them further out because that inventory is much more limited in Breckenridge. You don't have a lot of those larger homes. So we're doing our best to capture those bookings early. And, we already have our reservations team reaching out to anyone who stayed in house for larger properties or higher end properties over New Year's saying that, hey, I've got the pricing coming up this week. Are you interested? Let me start getting you numbers. Let's try to get you on the books earlier and, raising that ADR instead of just trying to get the same ADR for those. Our approach to January, what we're seeing, January is wrapping up really nicely for us. I think year over year, we've seen not necessarily an increase in ADR specifically as a portfolio, but an increase in occupancy because we've really been hammering home those last minute rates and doing our best to kind of, not race to the bottom in ADR. We have a lot of big groups here between Vacasa, Great Western Lodging, a lot of really big PMCs who have 300, 400, 500 units in the area where they'll really drop that pricing last minute. But we're putting our best foot forward again to get those bookings for spring break now, not necessarily going to increase in that pricing. But if I see a lot of conversion happening, it just tells me, great, my pricing where it needs to be. I can't really increase it because, as I think Katelyn's pointed out really well, if I go too high, all of a sudden I'm in a race to the bottom and the ADR I got 2 weeks ago because I want a little bit more isn't even close to the ADR I'm going to get now racing to the bottoms. I think our strategies sort of stay the same, putting our best foot forward and sort of dropping in between the peak seasons, the gaps in between MLK, that last week of January. This week has been pretty hard to fill for us. The last week into February counted in that same boat. So really targeting those early aggressively, discounting longer length of stay, but also willing to open up some of those shorter stay, maybe at a higher rate, but willing to show those 2 and 3 night bookings again at a higher rate. But just putting that out there. So if the guest is shopping, I want them to book. But in that last, what I'm doing right now for President, it's kind of, our market is sold out for President as a whole already. But that last week into February, it's going to be a race to the bottom for us. So I'm getting ahead of it. Same thing sort of with that first week of March, just trying to stay ahead of the market in those weeks that we know will underperform, then the weeks that we know will get booking and maybe even compression, like core spring break, for example, to sort of keep an eye on that every day and maybe dropping rates 1 or 2% just to keep sort of undercutting the market enough so that I can keep getting that longer length of stay and not kind of participating on the race to the bottom.
Yeah, that makes sense. I have 2 questions. One of them simple is, the first one is, because you mentioned that the booking window is both getting shorter, but also getting longer in different segments. So it's spreading out. Are the people who are booking last minute this year converting into people booking really long next year? Or are they just different groups of people?
I think those are just 2 entirely different segments of people. Mainly we are a really big drive-to market. I know Park City functions a little bit similarly in that regard, but we're an hour and a half, 2 hours from Denver. Now, if you drive up on a Saturday morning, that might be a 5-hour drive for you coming up I-70. But I think those are just 2 different segments of people. I think more this year than years past. My reservations team, even I'm noticing those inquiries, for next winter for way, way far out. And that our last minute demand really seems to be the same. But those last minute folks really tend to come from the front range. So they're not people planning, they're just looking for a good deal.
Yeah. And my last little follow-up is, you mentioned a couple times the dates are going to be a race to the bottom. How are you identifying those dates? What is telling you in your data that that's going to be a race to the bottom date?
I think here in Breckenridge, even though the landscape's changed, consumer shopping habits change, you can always identify when people are going to take longer ski vacations. Obviously, President's, MLK, New Year's in March and things like that. So using key data dashboard has really been helpful and sort of seeing that where is the market moving, where is it not? We'd expect to see President's spring break and those dates really picking up. But, if we've identified that, well, that first part of March is really struggling, it's pretty easy to see in its inventory numbers. When we see 20, 30% difference in market inventory, I think key data tracks about 3,500 units here. That is just a key indicator to us that we're not going to come close to selling out. I think year over year, those habits never change. We know we'll see compression for New Year's. MLK is always at 50-50. Presidents usually sells out for us, but last minute can be sort of a race to the bottom for certain homes, as we've all identified struggling. And then spring break changes every year, especially for us being a mountain market. The later spring break is, the more we're competing against those beach destinations. And then same thing kind of with Easter being really far out this year. So we can kind of identify those earlier on and see that, okay, where is that going to be and sort of, play that game of chicken, the race to the bottom. Or do I lower price? Do I not? So
Yeah. Shane on our last revenue management roundtable said something, Shane at Romy, he said, let the consumer tell you where they want to book. And you all have been mentioning taking a more conservative approach, really trying hard not to be overpriced in the booking window. And those two pieces of advice are valuable for everyone. If you're priced right, the consumer will tell you what dates are high demand, and then you can get ahead of dates that are lower demand. So Emre, why don't you tell us a little bit about what's going on in January for you guys, what you guys are seeing in your portfolio, if you're making any changes or implementing any strategies, and would love to hear about what's going on at Avantstay.
Yeah. So January is coming up pretty well, actually. Like we're seeing ADRs up in January, like, and kind of like we're seeing like most of the markets like ranging around like, 3 to 5% like jump in ADRs. Occupancy is like almost flat, like it's kind of like balances out like in most markets. So yeah, we're seeing that like stability that I mentioned, right? I think that's really the best part of we can foresee better like what's coming. Ski markets are actually been pacing well, like as for January specific, like we've seen like some reservations like from holidays like move to extend it towards January too. So like the month itself is benefiting like from those numbers coming from December. Yeah, I think overall, like as John mentioned, like we're seeing like similar things in Breckenridge and other ski markets too. Really like that mid booking window is kind of like weaker. Like we see like a lot of early bookings, but also like coming like last 30 days a lot. So that mid booking window doesn't like used to as it was before. So that's one difference we're noticing on ski markets. But overall, like ski market has been for whole ski season, like from December to March, it's becoming pretty stronger than last year. Yeah.
Yeah. What about your you have some markets that are like Q1 highs, right? Like you have some stuff in Arizona, things like that. How are those looking? Because I like to think of them as a bellwether for demand in the summer markets. How are things shaping up in those markets?
Yeah, desert markets are it's really I guess like market dependent. Like we're seeing like Southern California, Coachella, Palm Springs area, like it's actually seeing a big comeback. Like after having multiple years of like challenge in those markets, like now we're actually seeing pretty significant growth, like even double digits. In yeah, I think we're even seeing like 15-20% growth, like in many properties. So Scottsdale is a little bit challenging. I think one area that we see the events are not driving as it used to in Scottsdale, like Scottsdale, Phoenix area, like waste management. Like there's way more supply, and a lot of property managers are also like staying on the more conservative side. There are still like I was looking the market like yesterday, and like there are still like 1,000+ listings available for waste management, like in the market for only 4+ bedroom, 5+ bedrooms. So definitely that's a market like has seen like more pressure on the supply side. Overall, we're seeing actually like more positive momentum in Scottsdale, but I think the key takeaway is really like we shouldn't probably expect like those huge peaks as used to. Like we used to get like great premium for waste management, but those event festival types like bookings premiums are not coming as it used to. So that's one thing like probably everyone is like gonna adjust a little bit further, like based on the supply increase.
Yeah, that's a great example. How early were you noticing that wasn't really tracking? And do you feel like you recognize that fast enough to turn your strategy to really optimize for it?
Yeah, I think the pacing itself tells a great story, right? Like I think what is very critical is like keeping a constant eye. Like if you're, especially the advantage of having a bit larger portfolio, it gives us better idea of like which ones are how many pickup we're getting like in the market, whether our current price positioning is like needs to be adjusted, like if you're not seeing enough volume. So really, like, I guess like pacing data and comparing that against market pacing as well as like historical pacing. That's been the most helpful metric. Like we can give an insight like uh, whether current price position is like is priced well enough or like needs to get more aggressive.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, awesome, Emre. Thank you. Rachel, do you want to tell us a little bit about Q1 and maybe, I know you're focusing on the summer markets right now. How is the actual booking pace looking for the future dates? Is there anything that's conflicting there between performance in January and booking in January? Would love to hear a little more.
Yeah, so the demographic and guest that comes in January is very different to the demographic of guests that we sell to in January to come in the summer. Our summer is actually pacing really well. We had kind of a soft July last year for the first time. It's the first time I've really ever seen July be softer than June in terms of occupancy, and um, changed our strategy a little bit with how we're uh, treating July versus June, and it's looking very strong. Q1 is interesting because that does encompass typical spring break dates in March. However, with Easter being later, we're having some major markets that have spring break. We still play in March, but it's kind of spreading into April, which kind of splits Q1 and Q2. So for budgeting purposes, that's a little odd, but also seeing quite a strong April, which we predicted since we didn't have Easter in April last year. But some areas, even outside of the Panhandle, like down into South Florida and the Atlantic coast of Florida, we're having a hard time getting some traction in March. We have, I believe it's something like 63% of our bookings are direct. So we have kind of a unique marketing opportunity to use promos and things like that as a revenue management tool. So we use that to push length of stay and just kind of choose which properties to get in front of which guests at which time. But in terms of just overall performance for Q1, I would like it to be better. But I think we'll have, like I said, some of that shift into Q2 because of April.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Other than Easter, which is obviously moving quite a bit, are you seeing other spring breaks in some of these markets shift? And maybe give us some examples so anyone on the call can be like, oh, I wasn't thinking about that.
We've seen, I noticed a weird shift this week in pacing for the second week of March. So like March 8th, that Saturday, that's typical some colleges. I don't think we really have any local areas that have spring break that week. That one seems to have shifted a week later this year. On the opposite side of that coin, March 22nd check-in date is showing huge demand right now. That's a very typical spring break week. That was actually our local school's spring break last year, but we're all the way April 12th this year. So it's almost like our spring break is going to be like late enough to see better rates, for us locally. But I mean, it's very typical end of March, just bleeding a little more into April than previous years.
Yeah. I have been looking at some of the market data a little surprised because we know April's much later. And in a lot of markets I've looked at, you're starting to see some bumps in Easter, but it's definitely not like pacing at the same level that it was when it's earlier. How are you guys dealing with that? Is that something you're seeing in your data? Is like, what are you expecting for the pace when Easter moves that far on the calendar?
It really just spreads out our demand more than we would like. I mean, I'd love to control it and just put it on 2 weeks and jam all of my spring break into 2 weeks. In hindsight, I think it will be good. It will allow us to spread some of the demand out, spread some of the revenue out. But then we'll still see from essentially Easter to, maybe Mother's Day or kind of Hangout Fest was our metric here. That's another really quiet time, but pushing Easter out a little bit later kind of shortens that period where it's just a lull when everyone's back in school before summer. So, I think we just have to take the extra spring week we get into consideration and, the extra Saturday check-in we get in May and stuff like that to spread it out as best we can until we get into summer.
Makes sense. Last year, there was some really big lull dates in the spring where occupancy was extremely low in the market. Are you expecting that this year? And what is your guys' strategy for the dates that aren't expected to have a lot of compression? Is it any different than what you guys did last year or what the market did?
I don't think it will be different. Like I said, I think we'll lose a week off of that lull just because of when Easter falls. I've kind of done some tweaking to seasonality in Wheelhouse because it splits 2 months. And, how do we handle April's normally very quiet. We don't normally have a lot of demand into April, but we should get 2 good weeks of it this year. So how do we handle a half good April and a half good May? So that's been, a little challenging, but you can't get a spring premium, I don't think, for most of the panhandle from late April to mid-May. It would be a fool's errand.
Awesome. Katelyn, do you want to tell us a little bit about spring and spring break?
Yeah. So 30A, that area has historically been a 7-night minimum Saturday to Saturday for spring. And 2024 was really the year that we recognized that that's no longer a possibility, that these consumers aren't looking to stay a whole week. So that's where the length of stay is really our biggest tool, where we kind of shifted the narrative and went ahead and dropped it earlier. And that's when we noticed our progress start to look up. So we took that strategy into 2025 when we noticed again that demand was spread out into April, and we were not seeing the numbers that we wanted to. So we went ahead and dropped that length of stay, and that's the ticket. That's what we needed.
Awesome. And so length of stay being the primary driver to kind of recover the pace, how is that related to rate? Are you maintaining pretty similar ADRs? Did the ADRs go up to cover some of the losses in length of stay? How are you guys kind of relating those decisions?
You have to take into account the amount of supply. Supply has skyrocketed in the past few years. 2025, I think, is the year that we're going to start to see that flatten out. Nights available has kind of gone down a little bit coming into this year, but you have to stay aggressive with your rates. Unfortunately, you're not going to command the highest rate like you saw in like 2022 kind of thing. So, but giving your consumers the ability to price shop within that home's calendar is going to be the best strategy to keep them there. That they can see if adding on 2 nights is not that much more, why don't they go ahead and book it? And that's really worked for us.
How do you guys operationalize that for the consumer? Is that like, I don't know what your distribution mix is like, but is that investments that you're making on your direct booking website? Is that just having different prices so that people can really easily experiment on if they're on an OTA? How are you making sure that the client knows that they can maybe do that kind of upgrade? Are you calling them afterwards?
No, not really. But if you have that length of stay restriction in place and they can only quote 7 nights, then what's the point of price shopping? At that point, let's move on to inventory that has less stringent restrictions. So, the consumer might not be telling us that they're price shopping on this home, but you can tell if you don't have those restrictions in place. And then also we work closely with marketing on that as well to push that narrative.
Gotcha. So you're seeing the evidence of this price shopping because before people didn't do it, but now you're seeing these different iterations of searches on your website and obviously purchases.
Yep. And again, supply is up. They have plenty of options to choose from. So being rate competitive and then noticing that there's less restrictions on this home is the ticket.
Makes a ton of sense. What tools are you using to get to that information?
We use key data for our direct market data. That kind of it gives us a ton of insight into length of stay trends, how occupancy is pacing for the market as a whole, and ADR as well.
Awesome. Emre, do you want to talk to us a little bit about spring break?
Yeah. I think similar sentiments overall. Like it's really like we're seeing some ADR premium, but it's a little bit like really mixed based on the market. Occupancy is a little bit shrinking in March, different than, January. So yeah, we're seeing a little bit like occupancy pressure there. There's still like rate willingness to pay is there, but obviously it's coming at the cost of occupancy. April is coming pretty strong. Like it's like, as Rachel mentioned, is the shift of the spring break Easter from last year. So that's really like going to give a push, which last year the market has seen like about 15%. I think key data was showing about 15% decline last year. So it's really balances out like, so kind of like coming back to like where it used to be like 2 years ago. So yeah, we're seeing like more pressure on the occupancy side for March, but we started to pick up like in January. Like we've seen like a massive like volume like after the holidays. So we're hoping that like last 30 days pick up, like it's going to continue to improve.
Yeah, I'm curious, because you look at your pace really, really closely, are you seeing that pace really keep up when we look at like from basically the holidays into January? Is it starting as early as it used to? Is it maintaining the same volume of sales through the early January for those future bookings? Particularly spring. Summer's a little different.
Yeah, spring like started later than that it used to be. Like we haven't seen enough pickup like in November, December as we used to. But like right after the holidays, like we've seen like a really massive pickup, like more than what we used to. So kind of like that booking window is kind of like shrink. I think it's really like same similar team like what we've been seeing, like less booking on the mid window, and like it's really like people either are booking earlier or really last minute. And that's part of the, I guess like the story is there is really supply. As there's more supply, as people are getting more awareness of how the rates fluctuates in short-term rentals too, right? Like as their customers like getting smarter, like they're actually realizing like they're gonna be able to get better rates, especially like if there are markets that they used to go like every year and they know like the rate gonna come down and there's enough supply. So like customers are also learning from their booking experience in the previous years. And I guess like that might be a little bit related to that.
Awesome. John, do you want to tell us a little bit about spring for you guys? I think you still kind of maintain a little bit of pretty strong demand, but that's where it starts to taper off for you, right?
Yeah, I mean, you get past March, April, May, June is our shoulder season. And I think it's kind of, everyone said it in one way or another. It's really just having the availability, having the flexibility, having your calendar open more was an approach we took, back in December, going into January, understanding after spring break, the mountain market kind of gets a little quiet. We're competing against everyone down in Florida and the warmer markets. So again, just kind of putting that best foot forward, having shorter length of stay, having lower rates, and just having that flexibility for our market. For spring break itself, I think right now, again, I think Emre just touched on it. We've kind of lost that booking that we're used to having in the mountains. So right now it's just trying to get ahead of it, having that great pricing up, having availability, kind of having a lower length of stay showing for a lot of these guests, maybe at a higher dollar than if they were to stay longer, but just having that availability and flexibility for the guests in there, as well as just having just best price we can.
Awesome. And we've got about 9 minutes left. And I would like to touch on just some of your guys' thoughts on how 2025 is going to shake up, what approach you're kind of taking as we go deeper into the year. You can focus on summer if you got a big summer market. John, obviously, you probably maybe want to talk more about 2025 than summer. But just kind of curious, like based on what you're seeing now, how are you expecting this year to look? What are you expecting to kind of be implementing going forward? And we'll give people an idea of how this year is supposed to start. So Rachel, why don't we start with you?
Well, I agree with Katelyn that I think the Saturday to Saturday stay is dead. I try to advise against it every chance I get. I feel like we can, or historically have been able to push a little bit higher ADR on the shorter stay because it opens up visibility on OTAs that wasn't there previously. I've always kind of told homeowners you'll show up in every search instead of just this one very specific one. And, guests probably think they're saving a little money by booking 5 nights when in reality they may not be necessarily. So I think we carry that into 25. I've loved being able to automate the fall off of, I'll let you hold the 7 night for a little while. But I have advised against having it past, say, April. So it will fall off to a 4 or 5 night stay. If we can hold ADR close to last year, which so far we've been able to do, some of the strategies we have in place and we've kind of fenced off the highs and lows, I think that's a win. I think that we will end up with a better occupancy than we did last July because we were willing to give a little more on the ADR. So I think just the more flexibility that the revenue manager is willing to have, even though, most of the panhandle in Alabama is, people have been vacationing here 70, 80 years. It's not a new destination, although some of the markets further east on the Panhandle are a little more niche. We'll still get those guests, but also like John said, they're getting smarter every year. They unfortunately learned how to exploit cancellation policies, and the more we can minimize that and try to recapture the mid booking window guest, I think the better off we'll be in not having to do such a last minute scramble, race to the bottom type thing that we kind of had to do for a couple of years.
Awesome. Really great advice. Emre, do you want to give us some advice about or thoughts on 2025?
Yeah, I think as I mentioned earlier, like the biggest the best news that we're heading to more stable environment. Like that's more clear, and I expect 2025 to be the really comeback year for the industry, and not expecting huge growth, but we'll start seeing ADRs growing a little bit compared to previous years. It wasn't really the case in the market. Which I think Q4 was given that sign, even started a little bit in Q3, and seeing that really lasting towards Q1 and further, that's promising. So we're more positive on for 2025, and summer is pacing pretty well. One challenge I think I see everyone gonna face, more and more property managers are adopting more aggressive pricing strategy further out. So we are, everyone is eating from ADRs, occupancy is pacing way ahead for summer in a lot of markets. But I think that might gonna be pressure in summer when it comes to shorter booking window, when there are still a lot of properties available. And that's probably one risk I'm seeing across the board. In really I think that's the one challenge I expect to see, because there's a big change in the market, how occupancy versus ADR pacing for summer, and everyone is kind of adapting to that. So
yeah, that makes sense. That makes a ton of sense. John, why don't you let us know a little bit about what you're thinking?
Yeah, so summer in the Colorado, I don't think we ever sell out any weekend summer ever. I don't think we see sellout periods again until we get closer to Christmas, New Year's of 2025. But for us, I think the way we're approaching the summer market here is specifically just targeting those lower seasons that we know are our traditional silver seasons, and really be willing to give away that ADR in those time periods. Because if I can get a booking this early, great. I'm just happy to have that booking, because as everyone's kind of said here, dealing with a smarter consumer, a lot of last minute booking windows, don't want to be racing to the bottom. So I'd rather give it away a little bit earlier to get the booking. Hopefully it's not one of those cancellation bots or something like that, just going to book at a lower rate later or anything like that. And we haven't really seen cancellation rate go too crazy. So that's not a primary concern of ours. But just target those shoulder seasons, trying to give it away there, and really try to, focus on the core of summer for us, that July, August market. But for us, our length of stay drops down. So just having that availability open, having aggressive pricing in place for those shorter stays. I think Rachel touched on this. It may not be cheaper, but the guests may think they're getting a deal for staying shorter. When in reality, it might be the same as a 5-night stay, just because if I can incentivize a longer stay, I'd love to. But just, we can do that earlier on in the better, and just get that set so that we have that rolling calendar. We're showing availability through. If a guest is thinking about buying and they see the price, I want it to be a really attractive price. I want that booking early. I don't want to be talking to an owner in July why I didn't sell out July, or why I didn't sell July 4th, which is supposed to be sellout for us. I think just targeting those low periods, getting away there with the understanding that, listen, it's going to be a race to the bottom this year for the mountain community. We know it. Get it on early so we can fill around those gaps, and really try to not necessarily push EDR for summer, but really just secure those bookings, get them in there earlier.
Yeah. I'm thinking of the tortoise and the hare story. It's you got to channel some tortoise energy and just build it up over time. Because if it's going to be a race to the bottom, have a head start. Katelyn, why don't you let us know what you're thinking for summer and 2025 and this year in general?
So for 2025, I believe this is the year that we see supply start to level out. I've already noticed it in different markets that we're not having as many nights available. So whatever strategies worked for you in 2024, I would roll those into 2025, because while supply is leveling out, we still are on the higher end and you need to remain competitive. So, monitor market conditions kind of thing. Look at your portfolio, kind of like dissect it by bedroom count, by amenities, what have you. And notice where you need to make those decreases, but also notice where you need to make an increase. Maybe there's a 2-bedroom that's killing it. Make a little bit of an increase and make that money where you can, but remain competitive is the top priority.
Awesome. Well, really great advice from everyone. Really loved this conversation. Excited for a season of 2025, and you guys kicked it off phenomenally. I feel like, if I was going to put 2 words to the themes I'm hearing stabilization and building your base, right? Some things that I think have cropped up over the revenue management roundtables through the fall, and you're hearing it from some major revenue managers that, it is a strategy going forward. If you would like to hear this again, or someone who missed it, we will be posting this on the Wheelhouse YouTube. And then we do have a schedule set up that we'll be releasing for the future ones this year. Really appreciate all your time. And thank you for all the panelists. You guys are awesome. Love having you on.
Thanks, Sean. I
Thank
appreciate it.
you. That was great.
Bye, everyone.